Before the outbreak of World War I, Europe was a continent made up of independent and sovereign nations. However, the relationships between these countries were often tense, shaped by long-standing historical conflicts and an intense competition for power and influence. One major turning point that impacted the balance of power was the rise of France under Emperor Napoleon Bonaparte. During the Napoleonic Wars, France expanded its territory across much of Europe, challenging the existing order. Although Napoleon was ultimately defeated, his legacy left a lasting impression on the major European powers. In the aftermath, nations realized that allowing one country to become too powerful could destabilize the entire region. As a result, they sought to maintain a balance of power to prevent another Napoleonic France from emerging. However, during this period, Europe lacked a central international body to mediate conflicts or maintain peace, something that organizations like the European Union, EU, or the United Nations, UN, would later attempt to provide in the modern era. After experiencing the devastation of the Napoleonic Wars and witnessing the dangers of allowing any single nation to dominate, the major powers of Europe agreed to form a cooperative system known as the Concert of Europe. The goal of this system was to maintain the balance of power across the continent. If any country intended to take an action that might affect others, all participating nations were expected to meet and consult first to avoid potential conflicts. The key powers involved in the Concert of Europe included Britain, France, Austria-Hungary, Russia, and the Ottoman Empire. Although the Concert of Europe helped preserve peace and stability for a time, the system was severely shaken in 1871 by a major geopolitical shift, the unification of Germany. At the time, the region now known as Germany was made up of many small independent states, with Prussia being the most powerful among them. Tensions rose when France attempted to intervene in territories influenced by Prussia, especially those with economic and strategic importance. This interference significantly strained relations and contributed to growing instability. France's effort to prevent Prussia from unifying the German states eventually led to open conflict in 1870 in what became known as the Franco-Prussian War. The result was a decisive Prussian victory and a humiliating defeat for France. Following the war, Prussia successfully united the German states, and in 1871, the German Empire was officially proclaimed. This moment marked a major shift in the balance of power in Europe. The emergence of a powerful, unified Germany significantly altered the political landscape of the continent and set the stage for the growing tensions that would eventually lead to World War I, the formation of the German Empire and its impact on the balance of power. The Franco-Prussian War ended with a clear Prussian triumph, forcing France to accept defeat. Seizing the moment, Prussia consolidated the various independent German states under its leadership and formally established the German Empire in 1871. This unification was not only a turning point for Germany, but also a critical development in European politics. It disrupted the fragile balance of power maintained by the Concert of Europe and introduced a new assertive force onto the continental stage, a force that many neighboring countries viewed with suspicion and concern. Beyond its military victory and the founding of a new nation, Germany also gained valuable territory from France, specifically the regions of Alsace and Lorraine. These areas were rich in natural resources, especially iron ore and coal, making them ideal for industrial development. With unification complete and access to these vital resources, Germany rapidly transformed itself into one of Europe's major powers in economy, industry, and military strength. This rapid rise alarmed many of the older European powers, particularly those involved in the Concert of Europe, who began to fear that this new country might disrupt the existing balance of power. This shift was one of the key reasons the old system of equilibrium in Europe began to break down, creating the underlying tensions that would later explode into World War I. Another major factor leading to World War I was the growing conflict in the Balkans, a region in southeastern Europe. The Balkans were home to a wide mix of ethnic groups, including Slavs, Turks, Greeks, and many others. For centuries, the region had been under the control of the Ottoman Empire. However, by the 19th century, the Ottoman Empire was steadily weakening, and its grip on the Balkans began to slip away. The weakening of the Ottoman Empire sparked a wave of nationalism among various ethnic groups living under its control. These groups increasingly sought independence and no longer wished to remain under imperial rule. This surge of nationalist movements led to growing tensions, periodic uprisings, and in some cases, even military conflict. As a result, the Balkan Peninsula became a highly fragile and volatile region, one that would soon become the very spot where World War I would be officially ignited. By the late 19th century, the decline of Ottoman control in the Balkans gave rise to several independence movements. Nations like Greece, Serbia, and Montenegro successfully broke away and established their own sovereign states. This political vacuum attracted the attention of Europe's major powers, particularly the Austro-Hungarian Empire and the Russian Empire, both of which saw opportunities to extend their influence in the region. Russia, whose population was predominantly Slavic, positioned itself as the protector of Slavic peoples across the Balkans. Backed by cultural and ethnic ties, Russia promoted Slavic nationalism, especially in countries like Serbia, encouraging them to break away from Ottoman rule under the claim, "We are Slavs just like you." Austria-Hungary, on the other hand, had no intention of allowing Russia to dominate the Balkans. To counter Russian influence, Austria-Hungary began expanding its own control in the region. In 1908, it formally annexed Bosnia and Herzegovina, territories that had previously been under Ottoman rule. These regions were home to a large Slavic population and lay close to Serbia, a newly independent nation that had only recently broken free from Ottoman control. Serbia viewed Austria-Hungary's annexation as a direct threat, believing that Slavic lands should belong to the Slavic people, not to the Austrians. This move sparked fury and resentment within Serbia and throughout the broader Slavic world. At this point, it became increasingly clear that no major power was interested in supporting the weakening Ottoman Empire. In fact, every empire sought to gain from its decline. The Ottomans, now isolated and under pressure, began to feel abandoned on the global stage. In response, the Ottoman Empire started searching for political and military alliances, especially with European powers like Britain and France, hoping to secure protection and preserve its remaining influence in the region. Although at first glance Britain and France had little incentive to support the Ottomans, the truth was more complex. Both nations had significant strategic and economic interests in the region, especially regarding trade routes, naval access, and colonial ambitions that tied them to the broader geopolitics of the Middle East and Southeast Europe. Britain had significant strategic interests in the Ottoman Empire. Ottoman territory included key maritime routes that connected Britain to its most prized colony, India. If Russia succeeded in expanding its influence into this region, it could threaten British trade routes, especially through the Eastern Mediterranean and the Suez Canal. This potential disruption made the Ottomans a vital partner in preserving Britain's imperial supply lines. Furthermore, the Ottoman Empire was one of Britain's major trading partners. Any instability in the Ottoman economy or government could have a direct impact on British economic interest. For France, supporting the Ottoman Empire offered a chance to restore its international reputation. After being labeled the villain of Europe during the Napoleonic Wars, France saw aiding the Ottomans as a way to reassert its diplomatic role and gain political leverage in international affairs. This situation turned Ottoman lands into a battleground for foreign influence, as multiple European powers sought to intervene for their own gain. At the same time, many local populations in the region, fueled by rising nationalist movements, desired independence not only from the Ottoman rulers, but also from foreign domination of any kind. The result was a complex web of tensions, where imperial interests clashed with grassroots demands for self-rule. Eventually, these growing tensions pushed Europe into two opposing alliance systems: the Triple Alliance, consisting of Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy; the Triple Entente, made up of Britain, Russia, and France. This division marked the final stage before the eruption of World War I, setting the stage for one of the deadliest conflicts in human history. Both alliance groups in Europe had signed agreements to support one another in the event of conflict. This created a climate of high tension, where any small spark could lead to a major war. That spark came in the form of one dramatic and symbolic act, the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the throne of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. At the time, Austria-Hungary had recently annexed Bosnia and Herzegovina, a move that angered many Slavic populations living there, as well as the neighboring country of Serbia, whose people shared strong ethnic and cultural ties with the Slavs in Bosnia. In an attempt to reinforce imperial authority, Archduke Franz Ferdinand visited Sarajevo, the capital of Bosnia, in June 1914. While meant to be a show of strength and unity, the visit was seen by many locals, especially nationalist groups, as a provocation. On June 28, 1914, during a public appearance in Sarajevo, the Archduke and his wife were assassinated by Gavrilo Princip, a young Serbian nationalist with ties to a radical pro-Slav movement known as the Black Hand. The assassination shocked Europe and outraged Austria-Hungary, which quickly blamed Serbia for orchestrating the attack. Despite Serbia's denials, Austria-Hungary saw this as an opportunity to crush the rising tide of Slavic nationalism. With backing from Germany, Austria-Hungary issued an ultimatum to Serbia. When Serbia's response was deemed unsatisfactory, Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia in July 1914. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand quickly triggered a wider conflict involving the Allied powers of both sides. Russia, which had a close relationship with Serbia and long-standing tensions with Austria-Hungary, immediately declared its support for Serbia. This marked the beginning of clashes that soon spread across the entire European continent. As an ally of Austria-Hungary, Germany pledged to back its partner, declaring war on both Russia and Serbia in succession. The situation rapidly escalated as each nation, bound by mutual defense agreements, declared war to support their allies. This chain reaction drew many countries into the conflict in a matter of weeks. Germany, eager to challenge the established powers of Britain and France, saw this turmoil as an opportunity to assert itself as Europe's dominant power. It launched an invasion of Belgium, a neutral country under British protection, aiming to swiftly defeat France on one front before turning its forces against Russia on the other. With Germany's formal declaration of war, Allied nations on both sides activated their military commitments, escalating what began as a regional conflict into a full-scale world war marked by unprecedented scale and complexity. This war saw the use of new technologies and weapons that had never before been deployed on the battlefield, such as airplanes, poisonous gas, firearms, and trench warfare. A new form of combat that greatly increased the intensity and scale of destruction. Moreover, the clashes were not limited to the main nations involved. The conflict expanded across various regions, drawing in other countries with close ties to the belligerents. Smaller nations faced uncertainty about which side to support. Some small countries joined the Central Powers, such as Bulgaria, while the Allies received support from the colonies of Britain, France, and Russia. However, a country's choice of side in World War I did not necessarily remain fixed throughout the conflict. For example, Italy, which was initially a member of the Central Powers before the war began, declared neutrality and stated it would not participate in fighting unless attacked or provoked. Nonetheless, Germany, as part of the Central Powers, initiated attacks on other countries first, leading Italy to negotiate and eventually switch sides to join the Allies. This does not include other countries that later joined, such as the United States, whose involvement contributed to prolonging the war, which lasted for 4 years. All parties grew weary and desired a swift end to the conflict. How did World War I, which dragged on seemingly without end, finally come to an end? The answer is that the war ended in 1918 because Germany could no longer endure the situation, both internally and externally. Externally, Germany faced intense and prolonged fighting. Internally, both the civilians and soldiers began to show dissatisfaction and fatigue with the war, leading to uprisings and opposition against the leadership, including Kaiser Wilhelm II, who ultimately lost power. After that, Germany negotiated an armistice with the Allies, resulting in the end of World War I. However, even though the war ended, its effects on the world persisted, especially the Great Depression. This economic crisis was caused by the severe economic damage and depletion of resources by the world powers during the war, which significantly weakened their economic power. Additionally, the interconnectedness of global trade and economies caused the economic problems to spread like a chain reaction, affecting many countries quickly. Following the end of World War I, the world experienced the Great Depression, which severely impacted the global economy. One reason was that the once wealthy and powerful nations before the war had to sacrifice vast amounts of resources, financial, human, and economic, due to the war effort. As a result, when the war ended, the economies of these countries collapsed rapidly. Because the world at that time was deeply interconnected, the economic collapse in Europe cascaded to other countries, turning into a worldwide economic crisis. At the same time, after World War I, the Allied powers held a joint conference to agree on reparations for the damages caused by the war. Typically, in global conflicts, there is a rule that the defeated side must pay war reparations or compensation to the victors to cover the damages resulting from the fighting. However, the case of World War I was more complicated. The question of which country was truly the loser or winner remains unclear in historical terms. Some argue that Germany was not genuinely defeated because the armistice was simply a cessation of hostilities without an immediate surrender or territorial loss. Nevertheless, to assign responsibility for the war and to continue the peace process, the countries gathered in Versailles, France, and drafted an agreement called the Treaty of Versailles. The main point of this treaty was to declare Germany as the aggressor, responsible for the entire conflict. Germany was required to pay massive war reparations, including large sums of money, and the surrender of important territories to the Allied powers, such as valuable natural resources and key industrial areas that were major sources of income. The impact of this treaty on Germany was severe. Not only did it cripple the economy due to the heavy financial burdens, but it also caused the loss of vital income sources and resources needed to rebuild the country in the future. With the main revenue streams gone and limited funds already depleted, the hardships intensified significantly. The Allied powers deliberately planned in this way to prevent Germany from regaining its power and to avoid a repetition of World War I in the future. Although this strategy was somewhat successful, it left deep wounds in German society and economy, leading to widespread dissatisfaction, internal conflicts, and became a key factor contributing to subsequent events in world history. However, the increased pressure resulted in escalating violence and conflict within Germany. The German people suffered greatly and felt disconnected from the events. They did not want war, but were forced to bear responsibility for the worsening situation. Due to economic and political pressures in both Germany and Italy, two significant leaders rose to power: Mussolini in Italy and Hitler in Germany. Both became pivotal figures that eventually led to World War II. That said, World War II had not yet occurred at that time, so let us return to discuss the aftermath of World War I. One of the major consequences was the collapse of several great empires. The term empire here refers to countries that had colonies and vast territories encompassing large populations. Managing and controlling such extensive lands required substantial resources and budgets. However, after World War I, these countries faced heavy debts and financial burdens, making it increasingly difficult to govern their colonies. As a result, the power and stability of these empires greatly diminished. Moreover, the people in those colonies were also dissatisfied and resisted because they did not want to participate in the war. They saw the war as a conflict decided by the ruling classes or the imperial powers, while they themselves were merely forced to take part. According to Vladimir Lenin, the communist leader in Russia, World War I was a war of colonialists aimed at exploiting the colonies, rather than a war fought for the benefit or well-being of the general population. Eventually, leftist and socialist ideas gradually spread across Europe. Countries that were able to recover their economies quickly managed to avoid the crisis, but those that could not recover in time experienced revolutionary movements aimed at overthrowing the existing regimes. This led to the direct impact and collapse of many great empires. The four major empires that collapsed were the Russian Empire. It underwent a major revolution that overthrew the Romanov dynasty, which we often associate with the story of Anastasia. This event marked the beginning of the establishment of the Soviet Union under a communist system. 2. The German Empire. After the war, Germany was forced to pay huge reparations and cede large territories. Emperor Wilhelm II abdicated and fled the country, leading to the end of the German imperial system. 3. The Ottoman Empire. Although once a great empire, by the time of World War I it had significantly weakened and was nicknamed the Sick Man of Europe due to severe economic and political damage. After the war, nationalist movements emerged, causing the collapse of the Sultanate and the establishment of the Republic of Turkey. 4. The Austro-Hungarian Empire. Shortly before the war ended, Austria-Hungary surrendered, leading to the collapse of the empire and its division into several independent states. Ultimately, the Austro-Hungarian dynasty became a true loser of the war. Many people saw the monarchy as having betrayed the nation because, despite resisting for a few more days, it could have avoided being considered a direct loser and might have only had to negotiate the armistice. However, the Habsburg dynasty faced strong popular opposition and was eventually overthrown. Another significant outcome after World War I was the establishment of the League of Nations, an international organization created to oversee relations between countries and maintain world peace. This organization was founded based on the lessons learned from World War I, which demonstrated that the previous balance of power system was ineffective in resolving international conflicts. Major powers often failed to reach agreements during crises. The League of Nations played an important role in controlling and limiting the armaments of each country to prevent an arms race that could lead to war, acting as an international court of justice to resolve disputes between member countries, providing smaller and less powerful nations the opportunity to participate in meetings and decision-making on international issues, unlike the old system where only European great powers held negotiating and decision-making authority. Although the League of Nations ultimately failed to prevent World War II, it was an important step toward establishing a more just international system with greater roles for multilateral cooperation. It might seem that the League of Nations could effectively resolve international conflicts. However, in reality, the organization did not achieve the success it aimed for. A critical weakness was the absence of its own military force, which severely limited its power to enforce decisions or maintain peace. As a result, many issues remained unresolved, eventually leading to the outbreak of World War II. Nevertheless, the shortcomings of the League of Nations served as important lessons. These were studied and addressed in the creation of a new international organization, the United Nations, UN, which we know today. The UN was established with the goal of maintaining peace, fostering international cooperation, and possessing stronger mechanisms to resolve disputes between countries more effectively.